Good afternoon. Before starting with the examination of the witness, I just would like to confirm the changes that we have made to the schedule that was in the procedural order, and that for the record, we are not going to have a session on Saturday. We are going to have a session on Sunday from 2 to 6. And next week, we will have an extra hour until 6 every day. So it will be from 9 to 6. As of today, we will have, from now to just before 5. So having said that, I doy la bienvenida.
I'm sorry. There's one very quick preliminary matter that I want to at least raise now. It doesn't have to be decided now. I realize we're short on time today, but during the opening statement by the claimant, they made reference to the fact that there was a damages model that they, at least as I understood it, said they would be providing to the tribunal. If that's in fact what their intention is, I'd just like to have that clarified, because that's the first we hear of that. That would be, from our perspective, potentially new evidence, and you know, at a minimum, and we haven't determined what our position is, we would certainly want our expert to be able to look at the model and determine whether it's something that we think is appropriate or not for the tribunal to have.
Mr. Foster.
You already have it. It's the damages model that was provided to you with Mr. Thompson's testimony electronically. You have it.
Okay. Very good. We will determine. But you do intend to have ask the tribunal to work with that model in some way?
I think the tribunal already has the damage model, and all I was saying in opening statement is they will be free to manipulate it any way they want to.
And you said it's Mr. Thompson's model?
That's correct.
Okay. I think the confusion stems from the fact that I thought we heard you say yesterday it was a model by Mr. Pratt.
The model by Mr. Pratt was the WAC model that we put on the board, which you also have.
Sorry, which is it that you intend to give to the tribunal, just so we understand, so we can...
Both. Okay. They already have them.
All right. Thank you. We'll consider the issue, and if there's something to be said, we'll raise it before the tribunal later. Thank you.
Señor Valenzuela, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Valenzuela. You have a statement in front of you. Could you please read it? I solemnly declare upon my honor and conscience that I shall speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you very much. Mr. Stern.
Before I ask Mr. Valenzuela's question, I would state that he is one of the witnesses that the respondent did not list as one of the witnesses intended to cross-examine. Good afternoon, Mr. Valenzuela. Can you?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Valenzuela, do you have in front of you a copy of the statement you have submitted in this arbitration dated March 11th, 2011?
Sí, sí la tengo.
Yes, I have it here.
And do you ratify that statement and affirm its truthfulness before the tribunal?
Sí, ratificada totalmente.
Yes, I totally ratify it.
And Mr. Valenzuela, are you familiar with the work of the Railroad Commission, which was organized by the government of Guatemala in January 2005?
Sí, sí conozco.
Yes, I am aware of.
You're with that commission.
En enero del 2000.
In January 2005, the Vice Minister of Housing asked me to accept to be the secretary of the commission that was being created in January. And the first meeting was held on 11/5/2005, and starting then I chair the meeting up to June.
What was the name of the Vice Minister of Housing who appointed you?
José Luis Gándara.
When did these commission meetings take place? What was the time frame in which they took place?
The first session was held on January 11th, and the last one was on May 31st, 2005.
Why was this commission organized by the government?
The information I was given, rather the instructions to be able to create this commission, mentioned that there were some plans to have the railway work in the south coast from Santa Lucia, Coxamahuaca, up to the San Jose port, going through the Squincla, that is the main department city, so that the railway would be working in that area in particular.
And for what purpose was a commission organized in relation to the rehabilitation of the South Coast Railway?
Based on the information I received and was later verified, the sugar group had the intention of having the rail work operate starting in an area that they called Ciudad del Sur, located in Santa Lucia de Coxamahuaca, and that was going to be used to transport the production from the south to the San Jose port.
Was the issue of removal of squatters one of the issues that the commission was asked to address?
Mire,
The commission was created only with the purpose of carrying out the process to remove all of the families that were invading that area of the railway.
Do you recall Mr. Hector Pinto participating in some of the Railroad Commission meetings?
I remember that Mr. Pinto attended the second meeting. The second meeting was held on January 20th, and a day before that meeting, the Vice Minister called me to let me know that Mr. Pinto would be attending. As part of my procedure, I drafted the agenda and included the list of participants to have them sign that list as having participated in the meeting. And on the same day, everything was translated or was transcribed, and everyone received a copy, all the participants at the meeting, that is. And Mr. Pinto attended the second meeting held on January 20th. He arrived to the meeting, presented a personal card from Corporación Malati, and explained that his presence was because they were representing the sugar group. That was it. That's all that was said during the meeting. And he participated in that meeting.
How many other meetings do you recall Mr. Pinto participating in besides the one you just described?
He attended most of the meetings. They were held 1 week apart or 2 weeks apart, and he stopped attending after April 13th. That was the date when he sent a letter to the vice minister indicating that he was no longer going to attend. He sent a letter, and the vice minister sent me a copy of that letter, and as part of the copy there was a sticker that was handwritten by Mr. Pinto, where he was requesting me to read the letter and destroy it. And professionally, I couldn't do that because he had not attended all the meetings. So I sent that to the file. I filed it so that the letter would remain on file.
Okay, and we'll get to that letter in just a moment. Let me just ask you a couple more questions. Did Mr. Pinto, at these meetings that he attended, did he indicate that he was there on behalf of a real estate development named Ciudad del Sur?
Sí.
Yes, that's what he always said.
And was it your understanding that Mr. Pinto represented interests that were that thought that they could benefit from the reopening of the South Coast Railway?
He said that he was representing the sugar group, sugar producers group. He did not specify the sugar mill or anything. He just said the sugar producers group. That's the reason why he was there. And he also said that it would be beneficial to them to have the railway working in the South Coast so that the sugar could be sent to the port.
Okay, now could you take your notebook right there binder, and turn to the letter that is there, Exhibit R-189. Is Adrian to help him?
Just one?
See.
This.
Do you see that letter?
Sí.
Okay, and this,
Yes.
and this is Exhibit R-189. Now, is this the letter that you described a little while ago from Mr. Pinto in which he informed you he would no longer be attending the Railroad Commission meetings?
Sí. Esta es la carta.
Yes, this is the letter, and that is the sticker with Mr. Pinto's handwriting, where he indicated to me to please destroy the communication.
And did you comply with Mr. Pinto's request to destroy the communication?
No. Y no la des-
I did not, because he had participated for almost 5.5 months. Therefore, this was just another piece of the process. It was another piece of what we were doing.
And any meetings of the Railroad Commission after you received this letter?
No, la última que
No, he did not. The last one was the one held before April 13th, and he did not attend any other meetings afterwards.
Receiving Mr. Pinto's letter, did the commission continue to meet?
Yes, the commission continued to meet until May 31st.
Commission ever successful in coming up with and implementing a plan to remove and relocate squatters from the South Coast?
todo el-
All the work that we conducted throughout 6 months was based on project minutes, but we did not implement any plan. We had minutes to be able to have that plan implemented, The plan never worked. Everything was just left on paper.
Did the commission fail because Ferrovias had indicated that it did not have sufficient financing or investment lined up to rehabilitate the South Coast?
En la comisión
The Commission never dealt with the economic feasibility of the project. The Commission was intended to develop a plan to remove the families that were in the area of the railway.
que
I know that at no point, there were no observations at no point whether there were financial means to develop the railway, because this was beyond the scope of action of the Commission.
No further questions. You may now answer questions from Guatemala's counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Stern. Mr. Salinas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Valenzuela, good afternoon. My name is Daniel Salinas, and I'll be asking you some questions on behalf of the Republic of Guatemala. Mr. Valenzuela, you were asked about the genesis of the commission that you chaired. Remember those questions from Mr. Stern?
sí,
Yes, I do remember that.
The commission was the government's idea, correct?
así es.
That is correct.
Government assembled it and put it in place, correct?
Are you referring to the Commission?
Sí. La comisión la armó
Yes, the Commission was assembled by the government of Guatemala.
Now, are you aware, sir, that prior to the formation of the committee, representatives from Ferrovias had written to the Vice Minister of Communications complaining, among other issues, about the issue of squatters being present on the right-of-way?
no.
No, the only information I have is whatever was done starting on January 11th, 2005. Any document or any information prior to that is something I am not aware of, because that was not part of our work. Our work was to organize the commission, to have all the structures to remove the squatters from the railway, and that was the commitment of the government of Guatemala.
Personal knowledge about the commission being formed by the government of Guatemala, correct?
Would you please repeat your question?
Por favor.
With pleasure. You do have personal knowledge about the fact that it was the government of Guatemala that came up with and assembled the commission that you chaired, correct?
Sí,
Yes, I have no doubts about it, because it was the responsibility of the government.
y como parte
And as an official of the ministry, the commission was assembled for the government to conduct their work. In this case, it was under the representation of FEGUAS.
Apologies if you see me pausing after each question, but there's a translation going on, so I have to wait until the translation finishes. You also mentioned in response by Mr. Stern that the commission's only purpose was to assemble or put in place a plan to remove the families that were occupying the right-of-way. I believe the words you used in Spanish were única y exclusivamente. Remember that?
sí,
Yes. The commission was assembled with only one objective: to create the process to be able to remove the families that were occupying the right-of-way. That was the reason. And all the meetings held had the same goal, that is to say, to create a plan and also to have that plan work. But everything was done except for having that plan work. We had 6 months for planning that remained on paper, but nothing was done because there was no authorization by the government for that plan to be implemented because of the cost involved.
Your testimony, sir, that the only issues that were discussed during these commission meetings were issues related to the removal of squatters.
Sí.
Yes,
Único objetivo.
that was the sole objective. There was no other objective, no other goal. That is to say, to have those families removed so that Ferrovías could have the train operate along that line. Otherwise, it was impossible to work in that area because the train could not run over the people.
So there were no discussions about disagreements about compliance with contracts.
Mira,
During the first meeting, I clearly remember the one held on January 11th. The people from Ferrovías and FEGUA were trying to address contract issues, but I was not even informed of that. So during the session, an agreement was reached with the vice minister so that any legal issues or any differences between FEGUA and Ferrovías would not be dealt with at the table because the commission was only intended to remove the squatters from the right-of-way.
si me preguntan,
So if you're asking me about legal documents, there were no legal documents because that was not the purpose behind our work. We were in charge of technical work to conduct a technical removal of these quarters.
I'm not going to ask you about technical legal documents, but you do remember that the discussions during that first meeting were extensive about the disagreements about compliance with the parties' obligations with contracts.
me está preguntando.
Is that a question?
Yes, I'm asking whether your recollection is that the discussion during that first meeting about the disagreements between the contracts was extensive.
The truth of the matter is that since I was appointed with one real goal, when other issues were mentioned or discussed, I was not even aware of those issues and I was not even interested because they were legal issues. If you're asking me if I remember that, my answer is I do not remember that because that is not my area of specialization. I work with engineering issues and also technical issues, and that's the reason why during the same meeting a decision was made to isolate the discussion so that we could work towards our objective, that is to say, to remove the squatters from the right-of-way.
The question was not whether you were paying attention or not to the substance of the discussions, but whether, in fact, in that first meeting, there were extensive discussions about the disagreements between the parties and their respective contractual obligations.
La respuesta.
The answer is no, because meetings were held for no more than 1 hour. Therefore, things were dealt with in a very straightforward way. We only had 1 hour.
You mentioned that before and after every meeting of the commission, you prepared an agenda and then minutes of that meeting. Remember that testimony to Mr. Stern's questions?
Que si yo
If I prepared each of the documents that I sent after the meeting, is that the question?
That's okay, sir. Don't worry about it. My question was whether you recall telling Mr. Stern that before each meeting you prepared an agenda for the meeting of that day or the next day, and that after that meeting you prepared minutes recounting what was discussed during those meetings.
¿Sí?
Yes. I prepare the agenda and I describe the result of each meeting.
Camila, if you could give the witness first. Thank you. Thank you. Sir, you're being handed a binder with some documents that I'll be referring to. Some of these documents, I don't know what your proficiency with English, with written English is, if you can read it. The documents are in both Spanish and English. We will be projecting the English version in that screen that you have to your left for the benefit of the tribunal. But if you prefer to refer to the Spanish version, you have that in the binder after a blue sheet. And I will refer you to a document that is labeled R177. Do you have the document in front of you? Now, I refer you, sir, to the first paragraph under the heading Completion of Ferrovías Contract, or in Spanish, Cumplimiento de Contratos de Ferrovías. Please tell me when you've located that part of the document.
Lo estoy viendo acá.
I'm looking at it.
You prepared this minute, right, sir? The second page is signed by you.
Sí, yo la hice.
Yes, I prepare this.
For the tribunal, that first line of that first paragraph.
Fue una amplia
This was an extensive presentation by the parties, the conclusion being drawn that there is a need to enlarge on this matter with documents and comments within a legal framework, with representatives of FEGUA, Ferrovías, and the Legal Coordination Group of the Ministry of Communications, Infrastructure and Housing, outside the Item 2 Planning Roundtable with respect to the eviction of settlements along the right-of-way. That is what I've been saying. This issue was dealt with, but nobody understood what was going on, and we automatically decided not to deal with this, and we submitted it to other legal experts. We weren't talking about who was right or who was wrong. We said here, okay, if you have any kind of controversy, then you can go to the legal department of the Ministry of Communications. And this is a technical commission. This is not a legal commission.
There was an extensive discussion about those issues during the first meeting, correct?
cuando usted
Extensive discussions. What do you mean?
Amplia exposición, extensive presentation by the parties. It's not mine, sir. Right?
¿cierto?
That is true.
The issue was then delegated to another round of negotiations or another set of people who would be discussing the issue amongst themselves, correct?
Así es.
That is correct, yes.
By the first meeting, you were aware that there were disagreements between the parties as to the contracts that existed among them, even though you might not have known the details of those disagreements, correct?
Not,
I had no knowledge of legal problems amongst them. I heard they were beginning to talk about that, and we said, stop. This is not the venue to talk about legal issues. But before setting up the commission, that I knew the fact that there were legal problems. No, I had no knowledge of that.
Sir, then, as you were telling Mr. Stern, that the purpose of the commission was to remove the squatters from the southern coast of the railway, correct?
Así es, ¿sí?
And the purpose of that was
Yes, that is correct.
needed that southern portion of the railway to be profitable, correct?
Let me explain. This was the responsibility of the state. The state had a responsibility to evict the squatters that were invading the railway. Whether this was profitable or not profitable for Ferrovías, that's another issue. We're not talking about that here, whether it was profitable and not profitable. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So sorry if I pause after the question. I understand. Is it your testimony here today before this tribunal that you were not aware whether FEG needed the southern coast to be profitable or not?
I'm going to object to this line of questioning. It's beyond the scope of his direct. He did not testify anything about whether the South Coast line needed to be profitable or unprofitable for Ferrovías. It's clear that he's intending to go through the rest of this agenda here to ask questions that are unrelated to his direct.
And, Mr. President, with due respect, the witness testified that the purpose of the southern coast was to benefit the azucareros, or the sugar industry, and he also said there were no discussions about any economic impacts or considerations during the hearings. I will show that there, in fact, were discussions about those issues during the meetings.
I'm sorry, where did he testify this right now? Is that right in the record? No.
Yes, sir.
In the last few minutes?
Yes, sir.
Could you read it to me?
I'd find it.
Please. Yes.
And, Mr. President, just for the record, it was directly in response. The witness was responding to questions from Mr. Stern. And if the tribunal will indulge me, I will search the transcript for it. Thank you, sir. Mr. President, here's the first portion, and I'll continue to look for. In answer to a question from Mr. Stern, the witness testified, basically, information I received and was later verified, the sugar group had the intention of having the railroad operate, starting in an area that they called Ciudad del Sur, located in the San Luis Cosumalguapa, and that was going to be used to transport the production from the south to the San Jose port.
Where is the issue whether that was necessary for the railway company to be profitable? Because I think that's what is objectionable from the other part.
Yes, Mr. President. Two things. First, there was also testimony, and I'll continue to look for it, about no economic discussions at all during the meetings. But directly to your question, to the extent that the witness was suggesting that the purpose of opening the South Coast was because the sugar industry was interested in it, FEG's interest in that southern coast is directly relevant to the testimony of the witness and is substantiated by documents that I am presenting to the witness now and that the witness has already recognized and legitimated.
I think the witness has stated many times that this commission objective was to clear the squatters. I have not heard, and that's why I'm asking you to read it to me, that the objective was to clear the squatters to make the railway company profitable.
Well, that is,
This link, I had not heard it this afternoon.
well, but Mr. President, with due respect, the witness has been testifying about.
Where has he been testifying?
Well, I just read to the tribunal a portion where the witness testified about on whose interest the southern coast would be open. Certainly, if it would benefit FEG by making it profitable, it would be to FEG's interest to have the southern coast open. The witness testified that it was because the sugar industry wanted it open. And the witness
That's
also
fine.
said, to a question from Mr. Stern about Mr. Pinto, Mr. Stern was given latitude to ask about Mr. Pinto and Ciudad del Sur and the sugar industries and the sugar industry's interest in the railroad and the southern coast. He said Mr. Pinto was representing the sugar group, sugar producers group. He did not specify the sugar mill or anything. Certainly the testimony is the southern coast was being open because the sugar industry was interested in it. Now, to the extent that FEG was interested in that southern coast, the question is not only directly linked to the testimony of the witness in direct examination, but also directly relevant to the issues in this proceeding.
Okay, why don't you repeat the question for the witness, and we will dismiss the objection.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. And I'll repeat the question because I don't expect you to remember after all that. And sorry, Mr. President, just for the record, so as to preserve the clarity of this, the witness also testified on direct that the commission never dealt with the economic feasibility of the project. The commission was intended to develop a plan to remove the families. Again, there was discussion about the economics of this. But
I really, I mean, frankly, that's not a discussion of the economics. I mean, he has not discussed anywhere about the economics of the project. He has discussed about the removal of squatters. And, you know, this is very peripheral. And as you know, we don't have a lot of time. So please concentrate on the issues that are really relevant to the direct testimony of this witness. I will let it go with the question that you asked, and please rephrase it exactly as you had it before. But as for future questioning, please limit it to the direct testimony without too many adjective ancillary sort of consequences of it. I mean, you know, don't go too far in terms of relationship to the actual statement.
I will do my best, and I'm sure Mr. Stern won't let me stray too far.
Okay.
Mr. Valenzuela, I'll ask you again. You were also aware that FEG was interested in the southern coast of the railroad because it was important to make its business profitable, were you not?
What did you say? What FAG you said? FAG? Are you talking about Ferrovías?
Por favor.
You want me to repeat the question?
Sí, por favor.
Yes, please.
We're also aware that the opening of the southern coast was important to Ferrovías because it was the only way to make its business profitable. Isn't that correct?
No,
That is not correct. I did not have any access to information whether this was good or bad for the company, for the railroad company. My purpose was to have the infrastructure there to evict those families from the railroad right of way. And everything else, the legal aspect, the economic aspect, all of that, well, personally, I did not direct a commission to get to know more or less about those areas that you're asking about. Anything I were to say in that regard would be a lie because I have no knowledge of that.
First meeting minutes first paragraph on the second page.
Objection. He says he has no knowledge of it. And I think what he's going to try and do is read a statement from Mr. Sen, according to the minutes.
He
Again-
prepared these minutes, Mr. President.
Again, it's not based on his personal knowledge. He just wrote it down.
It's based on his personal knowledge of Mr. Sen speaking it in his presence, and he prepared these minutes.
And counsel is free to ask Mr. Sen questions about that when he is here to testify.
Scroll up, Kelly, please. Up, thank you. Can you highlight the text that begins with on this occasion? Mr. Valenzuela, again, you prepared these minutes, correct?
¿Cierto?
That is correct.
Right. On this occasion, Mr. Jorge Sen, you recognize Mr. Jorge Sen as Ferrovías' general manager, correct?
¿Cierto?
That is correct.
Sen was clear in stating that the railroad on the Atlantic route is not profitable, correct?
Disculpe, ¿que la vía de dónde?
Excuse me, what?
Mr. Jorge Sen was clear in stating that the railroad on the Atlantic route is not profitable. Is that correct?
Sí, estaba hablando del área del Atlántico.
Yes, it's talking about the Atlantic route.
And that the heaviest freight load will be in the future when the Pacific route is in operation, given the volume of freight they would transport there. Is that correct?
¿Es correcto?
That is correct.
The heaviest freight load for Ferrovías would be with the opening of the southern coast, right? That is, the Pacific route is the same as the southern coast, correct?
Ok. Quiero que nos...
Let us understand each other. This is what he said, word for word, but this is not what concerns me. I'm not sure of what he's saying. This is not within my area. I don't know if the railroad is good or is bad. This is not my area. The commission was set up only to evict the families from the right-of-way of the southern area. Many things may have been commented on. I wrote it here because it was part of the meeting, but there was no investigation whether to say that this was correct or not correct. This has nothing to do with my work or my profession. This was only stating what was said there. Whether the railway was good or bad, because Jorge Sen said it, that's his opinion. I cannot say that this is correct or not correct because I have no knowledge of whether this is true or not true. I don't know if you understand me. I don't know if we're understanding each other.
I wasn't asking you whether it was correct or not, but
Okay.
we understand each other. Now, moving on, Mr. Valenzuela, you spoke of a plan that never was and that was never implemented in terms of removing squatters from the right-of-way, correct?
Así es.
That is correct.
Actually, R178, please. Now, Mr. Valenzuela, these are the agenda and minutes of the January 20th, 2005 commission meeting. Is that correct?
¿Sí? ¿Qué se...
Yes. Yeah, that was held on January 20.
And on the third page of these minutes is your signature, correct?
Así es.
That is correct.
Now, if you go to the agenda for this meeting, some of the issues that were discussed included a presentation of the Ferrovías company with respect to all areas of activity, correct?
Así es, sí.
Yes, that is correct.
FEWA with respect to its studies of the settlements located within the right-of-way on the rail line on the Pacific branch in the Republic of Guatemala, correct?
Así es, sí.
That is correct, yes.
So FEWA conducted a study about those families, correct?
No, no.
No. FEGWA did not have any updated studies. The director of FEGWA reported that FEGWA's registers had caught fire. There was a fire, and now they were reconstructing the information. This was not updated information. This is what was said. Ferrovías and FEGWA presented information of what they knew existed as occupied areas. We had no way to verify whether this was true or not true, because this was just a paper presentation. They both did that, and Arturo Gramajo, the director of FEGWA at the time, said that they were presenting this, but this was a reconstruction because FEGWA's records had caught fire. They had been lost in a fire, so they had to conduct a census and conduct studies of every single place to make absolutely sure how many families were occupying the right-of-way.
Made presentations during that
Sí.
meeting. Now,
En esa sesión.
Yes.
R181, sir, please, in your binder.
Yeah.
Do you recognize these? They're
Sí.
from the, sorry,
Yes, I do.
February 17th, 2005 meeting of the commission.
Así es, sí.
That is correct, yes.
Going beyond the scope of his direct, he's clearly asking questions relating to his statement and not his direct testimony.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, but this time, I mean, you yourself said his testimony was about removal of squatters from the right-of-way. This is minutes from the agenda, and they are directly relevant to what FEWA, the government, and FEG did to put that plan in place.
I didn't ask him any questions about those specific items during his direct. I mean, there has to be some limit.
I'm sorry, the testimony was that it was on paper, nothing was done, and I certainly am allowed to cross-examine about that with the actual evidence there is on the record, other than his bare statements about what happened or didn't happen. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Valenzuela, again, these are the minutes from the February 17, 2005 meeting of the commission, correct?
Correcto.
Correct.
At pages 2 and 3 of these minutes, you'll see what you call a synopsis of the issues that were discussed during the meeting, correct?
Así es.
Yes, that is correct.
And at pages 4 and 5, there's a somewhat detailed chronogram, I guess, for lack of a better term, of the procedure for completion of the relocation of the inhabitants of the railroad line. Is that correct, sir?
¿Cuál es su pregunta?
What is your question?
4 and 5 of these minutes, there's a detailed
Okay.
chronogram of the procedure for completion of the relocation of the inhabitants of the railroad line, correct?
Ok.
Okay. That confirms what I said at the beginning. This was done, it was scheduled, and that was it. It was never implemented. It was scheduled during that meeting. At that meeting, it was said, okay, we're going to do this and that and the other. So we prepared a schedule, but everything was left on paper. Nothing was done. Absolutely nothing.
Do in any of the minutes of this commission include a statement about complaining that there was no action being made by the government, that you were mad that the government wasn't doing anything, wasn't willing to spend money, or anything along those lines in any of the minutes that you prepared?
Is that a question?
Ninguno. Yo lo
First of all, I'm not mad with the government or with anyone. I'm here to talk about the work that I performed. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying that work was done. This was administrative work, desk work, to try and see whether we could reach an objective, but we didn't meet our objective. When we had all this ready, I think it was April, and when we had to put up the money to make this work, the money never appeared, and this never materialized. The work was done. The preparatory work was done. I'm not mad. Just to be clear, you said I was mad. No, you're putting words in my mouth. I've never said that. I'm not mad at anyone. I am here to say, okay, I conducted this work. It was technical in nature. We work as brutes every Saturday even. I'm sorry to use this expression. We were trying to benefit my country. That's what I was looking for. I was trying to benefit my country, and at the end of the day, nothing was done. Are you listening to me? Yes, of course. Yes, perfectly well.
Now, granted, mad was my word and not yours. You're absolutely right, sir. Now, you do seem a little frustrated that nothing was done. Is that a fair statement?
I don't know what your Spanish is, but frustrated and mad, they're two different things. I never felt frustrated or mad. I came here to tell the truth about the work that I did. That's what I'm doing. But that I feel frustrated that it wasn't done. Gentlemen, if you work 6 months in a project, and at the end, when you need to have the money for the project to be developed, how would you feel? I'm asking.
But
Bueno, pues lo mismo que usted puede decir.
So the same thing that you may feel, I'm feeling. It was something that would benefit my country. I don't know about the benefit of Peter, Paul, or Joe, but after everything was done, nothing happened. There were hours of work and working on Saturdays and different sessions, preparing plans, visits, and I said, okay, let's move forward. Let's put the money in order to remove the squatters from the right-of-way. The money wasn't there. The work was not done. That was it.
you're not here to assign blame. It's neither Ferrovias' nor FEWA's blame from your perspective, correct?
Oh my God. I don't understand. I don't know if you're not understanding me. I'm not here to fight or to feel frustration or anger. I am here to say this is the work I conducted. This was the purpose. The government of Guatemala asked me to set up a committee to remove the squatters from the right-of-way. It wasn't done because at the time it should have been done after May. The money was not put up for the work to be implemented. I'm talking about the work that you're showing me. I'm talking about logistical issues and all the work, and that was the end of that. That is what happened. The store closed. There was nothing else to be sold.
Who are you referring to, sir?
The responsibility of removing the people from the right-of-way was the responsibility of the people from FEGUA, Ferrocarril de Guatemala. That was their responsibility. Because the vice minister told me that we were going to work towards removing the squatters from the railway right away because that was the responsibility of the state.
That it was the responsibility of the state.
¿Qué viceministro?
What vice minister? my immediate superior. He was the Vice Minister of Housing.
Today, you don't know why FEWA, and I take it it's your position that it was FEWA's responsibility to put down the money. As you sit here today, you don't know why FEWA didn't put the money, correct?
I repeat, this is something that needs to be clarified by FEGWA, not by me. I don't know why they didn't put up the money. The only thing that I know is that there was no money to conduct the work on the field. After conducting all the planning work and research, etc., nothing was done because we didn't have the money to buy the land or move the families or build housing. This is money that the government and FEWA had to put in. But I don't know why. I don't work for FEWA. I don't represent FEWA.
No?
No.
I have no further questions, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Salinas. Mr. Stein?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Mr. Venezuela, you mentioned that, and we saw something in writing about destroying this letter from Mr. Pinto. Do you have any idea of why you were asked to destroy the letter? Was there something in it that was particularly sensitive? What is your understanding of the reason Mr. Pinto asked that this be destroyed?
Quite frankly, I can tell you that I never even looked into why it was sent. He sent it to the Vice Minister, not to me directly. He sent me a copy. I received the copy with that note. It stuck to the letter. I read it, I took it, and I put it away. I want you to know that I have never gone about looking into things that are not my business. That was Mr. Pinto's matter. Why he did that, who knows?
You mentioned that he gave you a card for a particular corporation he was representing or working for. Do you know could you repeat the name again, and if you know the owners of that corporation that he was purportedly representing when he was at the meeting?
No, él solo llegó.
No, he just came and he distributed it. I recall that it was called Corporación Manatí Mananí. I'm sorry. It was something like that. And that he represented Ciudad del Sur, which was a center of operations they wanted to open in Santa Lucia so as to concentrate. Well, that's what they were saying. All the output of the sugar mill so as to be able to transport it to the port of San Jose. Manani, Manati, something like that.
Commission come to an end. What was had you finished your plan and the rest was implementation? Why did the commission end when it did?
Se le puso fin.
It ended because after having done all of the work of the plan and having everything ready to be able to move the families from the right-of-way, it was time to actually have the economic capacity that that required. And on there not being such economic capacity, the commission stopped operating. It died at that time, quite simply because everything that might come after could not be done because of the lack of money required to do it. Now, what money am I talking about? The expenditure for taking a physical census of the families the expense in purchasing the lands to which the families were to be moved, the cost of putting up housing for those families. That's the money I'm talking about.
The work of the commission, was it focused on squatters only in this southern corridor, or were you also looking at the northern line, the so-called Phase 1 line?
No, solo
No, just the southern area. The commission was formed for that objective, not for the rest of the rail line.
You have, Mr. Stern, any question on Mr. Eisenstadt?
I have no questions, no further questions.
Mr. Salinas?
No questions, Mr. President.
Thank you, señor Valenzuela. Muchísimas gracias por su testimonio.
Thank you very much for your testimony. You may now stand down.